Somewhere on a windowsill right now, there is an aloe vera plant that looks finished. Leaves gone flat and wrinkled. Color faded from deep green to a sickly yellow-gray. The whole rosette collapsing sideways like it's given up. Most people walk past that plant and reach for the trash bin, but aloe vera is one of the most forgiving succulents on the planet, and what looks like death is very often just a nutrient shortage layered on top of the wrong watering habits. Give the roots what they are missing, and that same limp, wrinkled plant can plump back up and push out new growth in a matter of days. Today we are looking at 5 natural fertilizers that do exactly that, why each one works, and how to bring a dying aloe vera back without a single bottle of synthetic plant food. Aloe vera, botanically Aloe barbadensis Miller, is a succulent from the lily family, storing water inside thick, fleshy leaves so it can survive long stretches without rain. That water-storing tissue is exactly what most people know this plant for. Crack open a leaf, and inside is a clear, gel-like substance that has been used for centuries to support skin recovery, soothe minor burns, and calm irritation. The gel is rich in compounds called Acemannan and other polysaccharides, along with vitamins, enzymes, and amino acids, which is why healers across so many different cultures independently arrived at the same conclusion about this plant, that the leaf itself is a small, living first aid kit sitting on a windowsill. But here is the part most people miss. A plant this good at storing water can just as easily be killed by too much of it. Aloe vera evolved in arid, rocky environments, and its roots are built to pull nutrients from fast, well-draining soil, not to sit in a puddle. When an aloe starts looking sick, the instinct is almost always to water it more, and that instinct is usually exactly wrong. Overwatering suffocates the roots, invites rot, and blocks the plant from taking up the nutrients it actually needs, even when those nutrients are technically present in the soil. So a dying aloe is often dealing with 2 problems stacked on top of each other: root stress from too much water, and a genuine nutrient shortfall underneath it, since potting mix that stays constantly wet also tends to lose its nutrient content faster, washed out with every watering. That is exactly why this plant responds so visibly and so quickly once you correct both sides of the problem. Aloe leaves are essentially water and nutrient reservoirs, which means when you feed the roots correctly and let the soil dry out properly between waterings, the plant can plump those wrinkled leaves back up almost as fast as it wrinkled them in the first place. You're often looking at visible improvement within a week. Firmer leaves, a return to deeper green color, new growth emerging from the center of the rosette. That is the real reason this plant has a reputation for coming back from the dead. It was never actually dead. It was simply drowning and starving at the same time, and both of those are fixable. Learning to read the leaves is half the work here, and it is worth slowing down before we get to the fertilizers themselves, because knowing which problem you are looking at determines what you do first. Leaves that are thin, curling inward, and turning a dull brownish color are usually underwatered or nutrient-starved and respond well to feeding. Leaves that are mushy, translucent, or turning yellow-brown starting from the base of the plant are usually overwatered, and feeding alone will not fix that. You need to let the soil dry out first, sometimes for a full 1 to 2 weeks, before any fertilizer will actually help rather than make things worse. Leaves that are pale, stretched out, and reaching toward a window are not a nutrient problem at all. That is a light issue, and no amount of fertilizer will fix a plant that simply is not getting enough sun. Once you have ruled out watering and light as the primary cause and the plant is still looking weak, faded, or slow to grow, that is when nutrient deficiency becomes the most likely explanation, and that is where these 5 fertilizers come in. 3 nutrients matter most for aloe vera, and it helps to understand what each one does before we get into the 5 fertilizers themselves. Nitrogen supports the green pigment and new leaf growth at the center of the rosette, and a nitrogen-deficient aloe produces small, pale, slow-growing leaves rather than the thick, healthy new growth you want to see. Potassium regulates water movement inside the plant's cells, which matters enormously for a succulent, since its entire survival strategy depends on storing and moving water efficiently, and a potassium-deficient aloe loses that firmness, leaves going soft and floppy even when watering is otherwise correct. And calcium strengthens the cell walls throughout the leaf tissue, which is what gives a healthy aloe leaf its structure. standing upright rather than collapsing under its own weight. And a calcium-deficient plant often shows leaves that bend and sag near the tip, even though the rest of the leaf looks fine. Every fertilizer we are about to cover targets one or more of these directly, using materials that are almost certainly already sitting in your kitchen right now. It is worth knowing how to recognize true aloe vera before we go further, since the genus Aloe includes several hundred species, and not every aloe sold at a garden center is the medicinal variety this video is about. True aloe vera, sometimes labeled Aloe barbadensis on the tag, has thick, upright, blue-green leaves with soft, widely spaced teeth along the edges, and the gel inside is clear and almost odorless when fresh. Aloe arborescens, a close relative sometimes confused with it, has narrower, more numerous leaves and is used in some traditional practices as well, but the two are not interchangeable in preparation or dosage. Several ornamental aloe hybrids, bred purely for colorful, patterned foliage, are not intended for topical or internal use at all. If you are growing this plant specifically for its traditional first aid applications, rather than simply as a houseplant, confirming the species on the original nursery tag, or checking the leaf shape against a reliable reference, is worth the extra 5 minutes. Before assuming a struggling aloe is simply hungry, it is worth ruling out a few look-alike problems first, since two of the most common reasons an aloe looks half dead have nothing to do with nutrients at all. Sunburn is one of them. A plant moved suddenly from indoor light to direct outdoor sun can develop reddish-brown patches on its leaves within days, which is stress damage, not a deficiency, and simply needs a period back in filtered light to recover rather than any feeding. Root rot from prolonged overwatering is the other, and it is the single most common reason aloe vera plants actually die rather than merely struggle, showing up as a soft, dark, mushy base that no fertilizer on this list will reverse. At that point, the only fix is cutting away the damaged roots entirely and repotting into fresh, dry soil. If your aloe's base feels mushy rather than firm, address that first before assuming feeding is the answer. Pests are a third look-alike worth ruling out, though they show up less often than watering and light problems. Mealybugs, small cottony white clusters that gather in the tight joints where leaves meet the stem, feed on plant sap, and can weaken an aloe enough to mimic nutrient deficiency, stunted new growth, dulled color, general lack of vigor. A cotton swab dipped in rubbing alcohol, applied directly to the visible clusters, handles a light infestation without any need for chemical pesticide. Fungus gnats, tiny flies hovering near the soil surface, are almost always a sign the soil is staying too wet for too long, which loops directly back to the overwatering problem we already covered since their larvae feed on organic matter in consistently damp potting mix. If gnats are present, that alone tells you the watering schedule needs adjusting before any fertilizer will make a real difference. If you have ever wondered why a plant this resilient can still end up looking half dead on so many windowsills, the answer is usually a mismatch between how the plant actually evolved to live and how it gets treated indoors. Watered on a fixed schedule rather than by need. Fed with a generic all-purpose fertilizer rather than something suited to a desert succulent. Or left in a container that never lets excess water escape. Natural fertilizers, the kind we are covering today, tend to correct this gently, feeding the plant and the surrounding soil biology at the same time without the risk of the harsh mineral buildup that concentrated synthetic succulent fertilizers can cause over time. That is the deeper reason these 5 methods keep showing up in old gardening notebooks passed between generations. They were not just feeding the plant, they were working with its natural rhythm instead of against it. If you want to keep learning which plants can support your health and your home, subscribe. There is a new one every week. Before we get into the 5 fertilizers, it is worth knowing just how far back this plant's reputation for healing actually goes. Aloe vera appears in the Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating back roughly 3,500 years, describing it as a remedy for skin ailments and infections. One of the earliest written records of any plant being used medicinally at all. Egyptian queens, including Cleopatra and Nefertiti, are said to have used aloe gel as part of their skincare routine, and Egyptian art from the period even depicts the plant, which is why it earned the nickname the plant of immortality, offered as a burial gift to pharaohs for the afterlife. The plant's reputation traveled widely from there. In traditional Ayurvedic medicine in India, Aloe has been used for thousands of years, referred to as Kumari, meaning young woman, a nod to its association with youthful skin and vitality. Traditional Chinese medicine incorporated aloe as well, using it to support digestive comfort and skin conditions. And when Spanish colonizers brought aloe vera to the Americas in the 1500s, indigenous communities across the region quickly adopted it into their own traditional plant medicine, recognizing many of the same properties independently confirmed across entirely separate healing traditions on opposite sides of the world. That kind of convergence, the same plant, valued for strikingly similar reasons, by cultures with no contact with each other, is part of why aloe vera remains one of the most trusted plants in home herbalism today, studied for its skin-soothing and wound-supporting properties in modern research as well, though always as a traditional support, never a replacement for medical care when an injury is serious. That reputation traveled even further through trade and conquest. Historical accounts describe Alexander the Great, on the advice of Aristotle, capturing the island of Socotra specifically to secure its abundant aloe supply for treating his soldiers' wounds during military campaigns. A striking early example of a plant being valuable enough to shape military strategy. Greek physicians, including Dioscorides, documented aloe's uses in their own medical texts, and the plant continued moving along Mediterranean and later global trade routes for the next 2,000 years, carried by traders, colonizers, and travelers, who each found their own reasons to keep it close at hand. A quick word on safe use before we move into the fertilizers. Since the channel's approach is always practical caution over promises, the clear inner gel is generally well tolerated for topical use on minor skin irritation, but anyone trying it for the first time should patch test a small area and watch for any reaction before wider use. The yellowish latex found just beneath the outer skin of the leaf is a different substance entirely, historically used in small, carefully prepared doses, but it is far more potent and irritating, and should not be confused with the clear gel. Ingesting any part of the plant in any form should only be done under the guidance of a qualified practitioner, and is generally not recommended during pregnancy. None of this affects how you grow or fertilize the plant, but it matters if you are drawn to this species specifically for its traditional first aid reputation. Beyond the gel itself, keeping a healthy, well-fed aloe vera around has a few quieter benefits worth mentioning. Like most succulents, it requires very little day-to-day maintenance once it is established in the right soil and light, making it one of the more forgiving plants to keep on a windowsill for anyone newer to indoor gardening. It also propagates so readily from pups, which we will cover shortly, that a single healthy plant can turn into a half dozen within a couple of years, more than enough to share with neighbors, replace a plant that succumbed to rot, or simply have a backup gel source on hand for the next minor kitchen burn or sunburn. There is a reason this plant has held onto its place on windowsills across so many different households, generations, and continents. It asks for very little and gives back a surprising amount when it is treated the way its biology actually calls for. Now let's get into how to actually use it. Starting with the fertilizer most people already have sitting in their kitchen this morning. The first fertilizer is banana peel, and this one is almost entirely about potassium. The nutrient responsible for that firm, plump leaf structure aloe vera is known for. A single banana peel contains meaningful amounts of potassium, along with phosphorus and trace calcium, all of which break down as the peel decomposes. Remember, a potassium-deficient aloe loses its firmness, leaves going soft and slightly floppy even when the soil moisture is correct. So this is often the very first fertilizer worth reaching for. There are two ways to apply banana peels, and both work, they just operate on different timelines. The slow method is chopping the peel into small pieces and burying it about 5 centimeters deep in the soil near the edge of the pot, away from the base of the plant itself, where it breaks down gradually over several weeks. The fast method, and the one that earns the word instantly in this video's premise, is a banana peel soak. Chop 2 banana peels and submerge them in half a liter of water for 48 hours, then strain out the solids, dilute the liquid by half again with fresh water, since aloe vera prefers a lighter feeding than thirstier garden plants, and pour a small amount directly into the soil at the base of the plant, avoiding the leaves themselves. Because the nutrients are already dissolved, the roots can take them up almost immediately, and growers frequently report firmer, more upright leaves within 3 to 5 days. Apply this soak once every 3 to 4 weeks during spring and summer, and skip it entirely in winter, when aloe vera naturally slows its growth and needs far less feeding of any kind. One extra sign to watch for with this fertilizer specifically, since potassium governs water regulation, a plant that has been floppy despite bone-dry soil, rather than floppy from overwatering, is telling you it needs this particular nutrient rather than more water, and reaching for the banana peel soak instead of the watering can is usually the faster fix. The second fertilizer is eggshell, and this addresses calcium, the nutrient responsible for cell wall strength throughout the leaf. Remember, a calcium-deficient aloe often shows leaves that bend or sag near the tip, even when the base of the leaf still looks firm and healthy. Crushed eggshell is close to 95% calcium carbonate, making it one of the most concentrated natural calcium sources available in an ordinary kitchen. The slow-release method is simple. Rinse eggshells clean, let them dry fully, crush them into small fragments, and work a spoonful into the top layer of the potting mix. In this form, they break down over months, providing steady, gentle calcium that also happens to slightly raise soil pH over time, which suits aloe vera well, since it generally prefers a neutral to slightly alkaline mix rather than the more acidic soil many garden plants want. For a faster result, make an eggshell tea instead, crushing the shells from 4 eggs into a liter of water and letting it sit for 1 to 2 weeks, stirring occasionally before straining thoroughly and applying a small amount to the soil once a month. Because the calcium is already dissolved in the water, the plant can use it within days rather than waiting on shell fragments to slowly break down. If your aloe's leaf tips have been drooping or curling despite otherwise correct watering, this is very often the fertilizer that solves it. Some growers also keep a small dish of crushed eggshell fragments sitting directly on top of the soil year-round. A slow, passive top dressing that continues feeding calcium every time the plant is watered, without needing to remember a separate feeding schedule at all. The third fertilizer is Epsom salt, simply hydrated magnesium sulfate, and while aloe vera does not demand magnesium as urgently as leafier garden plants do, a shortage still shows up as a general dullness, leaves losing that vivid, healthy green and taking on a slightly gray or washed-out look. Because Epsom salt is highly water-soluble, it corrects that gap quickly. Dissolve a 1/4 teaspoon of Epsom salt into half a liter of water, a notably weaker dilution than you would use on a leafy garden plant, since aloe vera is sensitive to mineral buildup in its small root zone, and water it into the soil once a month at most during the growing season. Within 7 to 10 days, you should see the color deepen back toward a healthy green. Because succulents are especially prone to salt accumulation in their soil over time, never increase this dosage or frequency, even if results seem slow, and consider flushing the soil with plain water every couple of months to prevent mineral buildup from any of these fertilizers from concentrating in the pot. To flush properly, run plain water through the pot slowly until it drains freely from the bottom for a full minute or two, which carries accumulated salts out through the drainage hole rather than letting them settle and concentrate around the root zone over successive feedings. The fourth fertilizer is coffee grounds, used carefully and sparingly, since aloe vera's tolerance for acidity and nitrogen is much lower than a leafy garden plant's. Used coffee grounds contain roughly 2% nitrogen along with trace potassium and magnesium, and that nitrogen addresses the small, pale, slow-growing new leaves that signal a nitrogen shortage at the center of the rosette. Rather than working solid grounds into the soil, which can hold too much moisture right against succulent roots, make a very dilute coffee tea instead. Soak 1 tablespoon of used grounds, not a full cup, in half a liter of water for 24 hours, strain thoroughly, and apply a small amount to the soil once every 4 to 6 weeks. Noticeably less often than you would with a thirstier, leafier plant. This slow, light approach feeds the new growth at the center of the plant without pushing the soil too acidic or too rich for a succulent's comfort. If you notice the new center leaves emerging pale rather than a healthy green, this is usually the fertilizer that corrects it, typically within 1 to 2 weeks. Keep a close eye on the surrounding soil color after applying. If it darkens noticeably, and stays visibly wet longer than usual, cut back the frequency further, since that is a sign the organic matter in the grounds is holding more moisture around the roots than this particular plant is comfortable with. The fifth and final fertilizer is aquarium water, something aquarium keepers have used on houseplants for generations, long before it had a name beyond fish tank water. When you do a partial water change on a freshwater aquarium, the water you remove is rich in dissolved fish waste, which breaks down into nitrogen compounds plants can use directly, along with trace phosphorus and potassium from fish food residue. It is, in effect, a naturally balanced, well-diluted liquid fertilizer that most people simply pour down the drain without realizing what it is. To use it, collect water from a routine aquarium water change, freshwater tanks only. Never water from a tank that has recently been treated with medication or chemical cleaners, and let it sit at room temperature for a few hours if it is particularly cloudy. Apply it directly to the soil in place of a regular watering, roughly once every 2 weeks during the growing season. Because the nutrients are already broken down into a form, roots can absorb immediately. This is one of the gentlest, most immediately available feedings on this list, and many growers use it as their primary fertilizer for succulents specifically because it is nearly impossible to overdo, since the concentration is naturally so mild. If you keep a fish tank already, this fertilizer costs nothing beyond water. You are changing anyway, and aloe vera plants fed this way tend to show a slow, steady improvement in overall vigor rather than one dramatic before and after moment, more a rising tide than a single wave. A quick practical note: if you do not already keep an aquarium, a neighbor or local fish store running regular water changes is often glad to hand off a jug of used tank water rather than pour it down the drain, so this fertilizer is worth asking around for even if you do not have fish of your own. Used together, in rotation rather than all at once. These 5 fertilizers cover nearly every nutrient a stressed aloe vera is likely to be missing: potassium from banana peel, calcium from eggshell, magnesium from Epsom salt, nitrogen from coffee grounds, and a broad, gentle mineral base from aquarium water. Because aloe vera needs far less feeding overall than a thirsty garden plant, a simple monthly rotation is plenty. Banana peel soak in Week 1, eggshell tea in Week 2, aquarium water in Week 3, and either Epsom salt or coffee tea in Week 4, alternating between the two from month to month rather than using both in the same cycle. None of these require spending a single dollar at a garden center, and all 5 are things most kitchens or fish tanks already produce as waste. This is only the first seed of what this garden holds. Subscribe and grow with us. Now that you know what to feed a struggling aloe vera, let's talk about giving it the growing conditions where none of these fertilizers even need to work over time, because the healthiest aloe plants are the ones set up correctly from the very beginning. Aloe vera thrives in USDA hardiness zones 9 through 11 outdoors, where it can be grown directly in the ground year-round. But across colder zones, it is most commonly grown as a container plant, brought indoors whenever nighttime temperatures threaten to drop near freezing, since this plant has essentially no frost tolerance at all. Regardless of where it lives, aloe vera wants bright, indirect light for most of the day, with some direct morning sun tolerated and even encouraged, since insufficient light is one of the most common reasons an indoor aloe grows pale, thin, and stretched out, reaching toward whatever window it can find. A south or east-facing windowsill is usually ideal indoors and outdoors. A spot with light afternoon shade in the hottest climates prevents the leaf scorch we mentioned earlier. Soil is where most aloe vera problems actually begin, long before fertilizer ever enters the picture. This plant needs fast, gritty, well-draining soil, never standard potting mix used alone, since regular potting soil retains far too much moisture around succulent roots. A dedicated cactus and succulent mix, or standard potting soil amended generously with coarse sand and perlite, roughly equal parts of each, recreates the fast-draining, mineral-rich conditions this plant evolved in. If you are mixing your own, a simple test is to water it thoroughly and time how long it takes to drain. Well-prepared succulent soil should let water pass through and out the drainage hole within seconds, not minutes. And if water pools visibly on the surface for any length of time, the mix needs more sand or perlite worked in before you plant anything in it. A thin top layer of coarse gravel or decorative pebbles spread over the soil surface also helps, keeping the base of the leaves from sitting directly against damp soil, which is one more small habit that meaningfully lowers rot risk over the life of the plant. The container matters just as much as the soil inside it. Always choose a pot with a drainage hole at the bottom, without exception, since water pooling at the base of a container is the single fastest way to trigger the root rot we discussed earlier, and terracotta pots are particularly well suited to aloe vera, since the porous material wicks excess moisture away from the soil even further. Watering aloe vera correctly means unlearning the instinct most people apply to other houseplants. Rather than watering on a fixed weekly schedule, water only when the soil has dried out completely, checking by pushing a finger 2 to 3 centimeters into the mix. If it still feels even slightly damp, wait. When you do water, soak the soil thoroughly until water runs freely from the drainage hole, then let it dry out completely again before the next watering, which in most homes means watering roughly every 2 to 3 weeks, far less often than most people assume, and even less frequently through winter, when the plant's growth slows dramatically and its water needs drop along with it. Overwatering in aloe vera is, by a wide margin, the most common way people accidentally kill this plant, far more common than underwatering, since the thick leaves genuinely can go several weeks without water and simply draw down their internal reserves without real harm. Propagation is one of the easiest and most rewarding parts of growing aloe vera, and it is worth doing regardless of whether your original plant needed reviving. Established, healthy aloe plants regularly produce small offsets at the base, commonly called pups, which are essentially clones of the parent plant growing from the same root system. Once a pup has developed at least 4 to 5 leaves of its own, generally a sign it has its own root structure forming. Gently separate it from this parent plant, working carefully to keep as much of its root intact as possible. Let the cut area dry and callus over for 2 to 3 days in a shaded spot, then plant it in its own pot with the same fast-draining mix described above. This callousing step matters. Planting a fresh, uncalloused cut directly into moist soil significantly raises the risk of rot before the new roots even get established. Temperature and humidity matter less than most people assume. Aloe vera tolerates the dry air of most centrally heated or air-conditioned homes without complaint, since it evolved for arid conditions in the first place, and generally prefers daytime temperatures between 18 and 27 degrees Celsius. What it will not tolerate is cold, wet soil, a combination that shows up often in winter when watering habits do not adjust to the plant's slower growth. So if you take away only one seasonal adjustment from this video, let it be watering less, not more, once autumn arrives. It also helps to set realistic expectations for how fast a full recovery actually happens, since instantly in plant care still means days, not minutes. An aloe vera dealing with a single, mild nutrient deficiency, caught early and paired with correct watering, often shows the first visible improvement. Firmer leaves, a slight deepening of color within 3 to 5 days of the first feeding. A more severely stressed plant, wrinkled leaves and faded color built up over months of neglect, may take 2 to 3 full weeks of consistent care before you see meaningful new growth emerging from the center. And a plant recovering from actual root rot will take considerably longer, since it is effectively rebuilding its root system from scratch after the damaged portion is removed. Patience matters here just as much as the fertilizer itself, and a plant that is slowly plumping back up, even gradually, is a plant that has already turned the corner. Repotting is worth doing every 2 to 3 years, or sooner if you notice the plant has become root-bound, roots visibly circling the inside of the pot or pushing up through the drainage hole, or if pups have multiplied to the point of crowding the original plant. Choose a new container only slightly larger than the current one. Oversized pots hold excess moisture in the soil that surrounds roots the plant has not yet grown into, which works directly against everything we just covered about drainage. Spring is the ideal time for repotting, giving the plant a full growing season to establish before the slower winter months arrive. So, to recap, an aloe vera that looks dead is very often dealing with 2 overlapping problems: too much water and not enough of the right nutrients. And because this plant stores water and minerals directly in its leaves, correcting both at once produces results you can actually see within days. Banana peel restores potassium for firm, upright leaves. Eggshell delivers calcium to strengthen leaf structure and stop drooping tips. Epsom salt corrects magnesium and restores deep, healthy color. Coffee grounds, used sparingly, feed new growth at the center of the rosette. And aquarium water offers a gentle, broad mineral boost that is nearly impossible to overdo. Pair any of these with bright, indirect light, fast-draining soil, a pot with real drainage, and watering only once the soil has fully dried out. And you are not just reviving a struggling plant, you are setting it up to keep thriving and keep producing that healing gel inside its leaves for years to come. The next time you look at an aloe vera that seems past saving, check the soil before you check the trash bin. It might just be waiting for what's already sitting in your kitchen.